Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. We're going to be taking an in-depth look at every supernatural species from the TV show and book series True Blood. Vampires and their subspecies, werewolves, shapeshifters and skinwalkers, and also witches, Brujo, Maenads, and Faeries. This is a compilation of 3 videos that I made, but I really wanted all the True Blood lore to be available in one video. If you enjoy videos about vampires, werewolves, and other supernatural and demonic creatures, leave a like and maybe hit that subscribe button. I hope you enjoy. The show came out in 2008 on HBO and has 7 seasons. The show has received great praise from fans and critics, which is rare. The television adaptation was created by Alan Ball and is based on the best-selling novels by Charlene Harris. Anna Paquin, who plays Sookie, also played Rogue in the original live-action X-Men movies, as well as a lot of other roles. The show follows Sookie Stackhouse, a girl with unique abilities. Most notably, she can read people's thoughts. She falls in love with a vampire and trouble ensues. I won't be going over the plot of the show. I'll be focusing on the origin of the vampires, their hierarchy, as well as abilities and weaknesses. I will also briefly explain some of the other supernatural races from the show. The other supernatural creatures in the show are fairies, shapeshifters, skinwalker, Maenad, and werewolf. Fairy, spelled like this, are some of the most powerful supernatural creatures in the series. Sookie Stackhouse is a halfling, or a half fairy, so she possesses lesser abilities than a full fairy, but is still quite strong. They once occupied the earth just like humans, but now they mostly exist on the dimensional plane of fairy. You must have fairy blood to enter this dimension. Fairies also have guides that can watch over them and can visit them in their dreams. They're referred to as fairy godparents. Yeah, like that. Shapeshifters are a species that can change their form into an animal. They have to study the animal very intently. This is called imprinting. After that, they can take the animal's form at will and any others they have imprinted. They are one branch of weres, like werewolves. Werewolves and were-panthers are considered versions of shapeshifters. Some vampires can change their form, but it's rare. Were-panthers are weaker than werewolves due to the fact that they have become endangered and started inbreeding to save their race, resulting in becoming weaker. Although there are some that are still very strong. There is also skinwalkers. The difference between a shapeshifter and a skinwalker is that a shapeshifter can only take the form of animals, where a skinwalker can take the form of animals and humans. Vampires are much stronger than werewolves. Bill, who is a pretty young vampire, was able to kill 3 and wound 2 werewolves with relative ease. However, Eric states that once a werewolf has drank some vampire blood, their strength can be a bit of a challenge. A vampire named Russell Edgington has secretly used werewolves for over 1,000 years to serve him and do his bidding, even feeding them his blood to make them stronger. But this is highly frowned upon, and if the vampires ever found out about this, he would be punished. If you would like a full video on the werewolves, were-panthers, and shapeshifters, please let me know in the comments, because there's definitely a lot more to be said. One last race before we get to the vampires are the Maenads. They are a very rare supernatural species. They are all female and the followers of Dionysus, the god of ritual madness and ecstasy. Their name, Maenad, translates to the raving ones. They are immortal and have accelerated healing, increased strength and speed just like vampires. Their skin is so strong that one is seen deflecting a bullet with her bare hand. It is impossible for a vampire to drain them, as their blood is a black, corrosive, and poisonous liquid. In the books, Maenads also have a multitude of powerful mental abilities, and one of them is to infect a vampire with the madness infection. This makes vampires become insane and more beast-like. The condition is incurable and the vampire must be staked. They also possess the ability to make shapeshifters and werewolves forcibly change form. Maenads also have the ability to influence people's behavior. A Maenad was able to make everyone at Marlowe's bar act happy and euphoric, then later was able to make all the bar patrons become angry and start arguing. When someone is under the influence of a Maenad, their eyes turn solid black. It's said in the show that Maenads could only influence humans and cannot influence supernatural creatures such as shapeshifters and vampires in the same way. Although Maenads look like humans, they can change their hands into large talons that can shred and poison their prey. Apparently the poison works similar to how Komodo dragons does. Vampire blood has immense healing properties, which we'll talk about soon, but not even vampire blood can heal the person that has been exposed to the poison of a Maenad. Now we can talk about the vampires. The first episode of the show introduces us to the world of true blood. Vampires have recently revealed themselves to the world after a kind of synthetic blood was developed. This product is called true blood. This vampire representative assures the humans that with true blood they have no need to feed on humans anymore and can live together. Vampires have been able to fit in and work with humans relatively well, but reactions to vampires are very different depending on where you are in the world. Places like Latin America and Iran hunt down vampires relentlessly. This caused a lot of vampires to flee to more understanding and tolerant countries like the United States, where although they have limited rights, they are legal citizens. The vampire community and supporters fight for equal rights for vampires, but there are a lot of anti-vampire groups, some of them religious, believing that vampires are evil. It's important to note that although vampires have revealed themselves to the world, all other supernatural species remain hidden and are considered as myth or legend. Even some vampires say they preferred being in the shadows. True blood is what led the vampires to show themselves to humans. It is a synthetic bottled blood created by Japanese scientists. It was developed on the orders of the Vampire Authority, which is the government that controls the vampires, and it took the brightest vampire scientists decades to develop. True blood is meant to be consumed warm, like blood out of a warm body, but some vampires say true blood tastes awful compared to real human blood. The blood is offered in many different flavors, or blood types. The origin of vampires. No one knows exactly when vampires were created. According to the Vampire Bible, God created the first vampire named Lilith, and after created the first humans, Adam and Eve, to be food for her. But no one knows how true this statement is. Different human religious groups have many different theories on who was the first vampire, including Jesus or Lazarus, who both rose from the dead. But most religious people believe vampires to be creations of the devil and possess no soul. However, they do. Some of the oldest vampires in the show are Russell, who is around 2,850 years old, Macklin Warlow, who is 5,541 years old, and Lilith, the original vampire, who is over 8,000 years old. But the average age of most vampires is under 1,000. According to the vampire Bill Compton, vampires were the ones who created a lot of the myths to protect themselves, such as the myth that vampires can't be seen in mirrors. Then all a vampire had to do to prove he wasn't a vampire was to show his reflection in a mirror. Other myths created by vampires include holy water, holy grounds such as churches, and that they don't appear in photographs. Even after they revealed themselves to humankind, they try to keep their real weaknesses very secret, such as silver and Hep D, a mutation of hepatitis that is especially dangerous to vampires. They also keep other things secret, such as the fact that vampire blood can actually heal humans if it's ingested, but they probably fear that they'll be hunted down and harvested for their blood. How does someone become a vampire? These vampires cannot turn someone by biting them. To become a vampire, a human must be drained of all their blood by a vampire and have some of that vampire blood put back into their body. After that, the human and the vampire must sleep in the ground together for one night, and the next night the human will arise as a newborn. When the human and vampire sleep together in the ground, their essence is shared. It's a process that even vampires don't fully understand. A vampire that creates a new vampire is called a maker. The maker and the newborn will have a special connection. A maker can even feel the pain and duress that their progeny undergoes. This bond can be broken if the maker abandons or releases their creation. They can do this by saying, "As your maker, I release you." And after that, the vampire will no longer be able to be controlled by their maker. The maker has certain abilities that allow them to control their creation. By calling their name, a vampire will become aware their maker is calling them and can sometimes sense where they are. A maker can also force their progeny to do anything they want as long as they say, "As your maker, I command you." Most vampires take becoming a maker very seriously. Eric, who is a vampire of over 1,000 years old, has only created 2 vampires. And Bill, who is 175 years old, has only created 1, and that was against his will. There are a few outliers that turn people often, but they are rare. Vampires look almost identical to humans aside from their very pale skin and fangs. Their fangs are retractable though, so it's fairly easy for them to be hidden. But a vampire will involuntarily show their fangs if they become stimulated by something like blood or become excited or enraged. A vampire can remove their fangs, but they will grow back in a few months. Some select vampires have the ability to make their eyes turn blood red. Once turned, a vampire will remain in the state they were when they were turned forever. They will never age and cannot gain or lose weight. So if you're overweight and get turned, that's how you will look forever. Vampires do, however, grow hair, as one vampire is seen cutting his hair, and another states that he does indeed shave. Vampires are technically dead already, but when they sleep, they are considered truly dead, at least for a while. And the vampire bar Fantasia has a sign up during the day when they are closed that reads, "Sorry, we're dead." Here are a couple differences between vampires and humans. Because vampires have no blood flow in their bodies, due to a lack of heartbeat, they do not have any bodily functions, aka they do not use the bathroom and cannot become pregnant or impregnate someone, human or supernatural. Along with no heartbeat, they also don't breathe. Most vampires still do it out of habit and to help them when speaking. They also need to breathe at least a bit to utilize their advanced sense of smell. Vampires are technically deceased, which means not only do they have no heartbeat or body heat, but they also have no brainwaves or electrical impulses. This is why Sookie cannot read the minds of vampires like she can other humans or supernatural creatures. One other thing is that vampires have different tear ducts than humans, and they cry blood instead of regular tears. A vampire's body cannot produce any other liquid than blood. Vampires must feed on blood to survive, or synthetic blood. They cannot consume regular food or liquid. They can also not consume supernatural blood for sustenance, with the exception of fairies. Their blood is highly sought after by vampires. It's said that fairy blood is like catnip to vampires. Synthetic blood will sustain the health of a vampire, but it does not get rid of their cravings for human blood for some reason. True blood comes in different flavors, as in blood types, and most vampires have a favorite blood type to consume, but any blood will do if they're hungry. If a vampire does not consume blood, they will experience something called the bleeds. The vampire will begin to bleed from their ears and nose. This can also happen if they don't sleep during the day like they're supposed to. Vampires become much weaker when they haven't fed and will eventually die from the bleeds. It's also possible for a vampire to consume too much blood. If this happens, the vampire will have confusion and euphoria, similar to being very intoxicated. A vampire can't consume the blood of shapeshifters, werewolves, or Maenads, but they can consume the blood of fairies. Not only can they consume it, but it actually has added benefits over human blood. When a vampire consumes fairy blood, they become more resistant to their weaknesses. It also matters if it's half fairy or full fairy or a fairy vampire hybrid. The blood of a half fairy only allowed a vampire to walk in the sun for a short time without being burned, but it did prevent them from completely burning up. When a vampire completely drained a full fairy, he was able to walk in the sun for at least an hour with no harm. Fairy blood was even able to temporarily keep a vampire alive after being staked. The blood of a fairy vampire hybrid is even more potent, and after consuming it, a vampire will be able to walk in the sun forever, unless the fairy they drank from dies. Vampires consume human blood, but humans can also consume vampire blood, or V. Vampire blood is sold on the street like a drug, and is looked down upon by vampires. In the first episode of the show, some kids try to buy V from a guy pretending to be a vampire, but when a real vampire hears the kids are trying to buy V, he tells them that they better leave now, and then proceeds to tell the man behind the counter that was pretending to be a vampire if he impersonates a vampire ever again, he'll kill him. If vampire blood is consumed by a human in the right dosage, it can act like a drug, inducing a euphoric state. Vampire blood can also heal grievous wounds. Sookie Stackhouse is brutally attacked, but after drinking vampire blood from Bill, her wounds were completely healed the next day. Bill says that most people don't know vampire blood can do that, and he says vampires would like it to stay that way. Because like I said before, if humans knew that vampire blood could do that, vampires would probably be hunted down for their blood. Some other effects of consuming V are a temporary bond with the vampire whose blood was consumed. That vampire could even sense where the person was that consumed their blood. You can also experience increased strength, heightened senses, and also increased aggression and libido. V can also cause hallucinations, and if you stop taking it abruptly, it can cause withdrawal symptoms just like any other drug. In the show, they say it's best to take 1 or 2 drops to get the desired effect, but Jason Stackhouse drank a whole vial and experienced sweating, pain, fatigue, and some other bad things. Vampires have emotions like humans, but they experience them to a lesser degree, possibly because they have to live for so much longer than a human that they have to learn to let their emotions go, or they will become overcome by loss. As a vampire ages, they learn to control their bloodlust more and more and can act more civilized around humans. Vampires also grow stronger with age, but they become more susceptible to sunlight as well. Vampires' powers and abilities. They of course have super strength and grow stronger with age. Vampires are stronger than werewolves and shapeshifters. Vampires are also the fastest moving of the supernatural creatures. They move so fast that a human could only perceive a blur, but vampires' advanced senses allow them to perceive other vampires even while moving extremely fast. Like strength, vampires' speed increases with age too. A 1,000-year-old vampire named Eric was able to perceive a bullet moving in slow motion like the Flash, and he was still able to move at regular speed. But most vampires are not fast enough to dodge or jump in front of a bullet. Vampires have heightened senses. They can smell and hear from an extreme distance and are able to see perfectly fine in complete darkness. They are very resistant to physical trauma and can sustain massive damage and still function. A punch from a strong human does not even make a vampire flinch, but if a vampire does receive some damage, probably from another supernatural creature, their healing abilities work very fast. If a wound is bad enough, they might have to consume some fresh human blood for their healing abilities to work properly, but they'll still heal. Vampires are also immune to all sickness and disease, aside from hepatitis D and hepatitis V, which are conditions that specifically affect vampires. Hep D is relatively harmless to humans but will weaken vampires for several months, putting them at risk of being staked much easier. Hepatitis V, on the other hand, will slowly weaken a vampire and eventually kill them. Some vampires have the ability to fly. We see some younger vampires like Bill able to levitate, but it is implied that older vampires can fully fly. Sookie Stackhouse asks a vampire named Eric if all vampires can fly, and his response is, "Can all humans sing?" So that kind of implies that it's more like a skill, and that any vampire could possibly learn to fly if they wanted to. Vampires possess a mental ability called glamour. Vampires can glamour humans and some supernatural creatures. It is a kind of hypnosis or compulsion that through eye contact a vampire can make people forget things, or do anything they say. But it should be done in moderation, because excessive glamoring on someone can cause adverse mental effects. Creatures that are immune to glamour are other vampires, ghosts, fairies, Maenads, and powerful witches. Vampires also possess a perfect memory. They can remember everything and can never forget. Vampires sometimes refer to their memories as vaults. Certain vampires like Bill also have the ability to mimic other people's voices. This ability must be rare because only a few vampires are seen doing it. The first vampire, Lilith, and her sirens display some unique abilities compared to regular vampires. During the show, Bill consumes some of Lilith's blood, and he also gains some of these unique abilities temporarily. These abilities include much greater strength, speed, and their mental abilities such as glamour are enhanced. When a regular maker calls on their vampire, that vampire will know their vampire is seeking them and be compelled to go to them. However, when Lilith calls her progeny, it can cause them to have severe pains and vomit blood if the call is not answered. The first vampire can also astral project. She was able to manifest herself physically out of blood even after her true death. She can also project herself into the minds of those who have consumed her blood. Lilith and her sirens have also been shown teleporting on the astral plane, able to disappear and reappear in a cloud of blood. Lilith and her sirens also have longer fangs. She can tell what supernatural species someone is just by looking at them and doesn't have to use smell. Fairies are seen having light coming out of their mouths. The first vampire and her sirens also appear invisible to all other vampires, allowing only those that they choose to see them. After Bill drank Lilith's blood, he was able to perceive the future, similar to precognition like a Jedi. He became immune to fire and being staked. He was staked directly in the heart and it had no effect on him. He displayed having telekinesis as well, being able to lift objects with his mind. And lastly, he could enter a human's home without invitation. Bill gained these abilities after drinking Lilith's blood, so presumably she has all the same abilities. An extremely strong kind of vampire is a fairy-vampire hybrid. They possess all the magical abilities of a fairy like telepathy, controlling light, and many more, as well as vampire abilities, which makes them possibly the most deadly of the supernatural species. Fairy vampires can survive on normal food like a human or on blood like a vampire. Fairy vampires can enter people's homes without an invitation, and they are also immune to silver and sunlight. Like I said before, their blood can also allow another vampire to walk in the sun permanently, unless the fairy vampire that gave you the blood dies. Vampire weaknesses. The vampires of True Blood have many of the traditional weaknesses that other vampires have, but there are some differences. They are weak to silver, and it will burn them if it comes in contact with their skin, and it drains their strength. We see in the first season that it can be used to subdue a vampire from moving. A long silver chain is placed over Bill, and even though he is extremely strong, he could not move while the chain was on him. As a vampire gets older, they become stronger, but they become more susceptible to the sun. A very old vampire named Godric was completely burned up in about 30 seconds, whereas Bill, who is a much younger vampire, was only badly burned after spending a few minutes in the sun. Burns sustained from sunlight do not heal as fast as other wounds or even burns from fire. Vampires can be killed with fire if they are considerably burned. And as I said before, vampires must sleep during the day. If they go too long without sleep, they experience the bleeds, causing their nose and ears to bleed and become severely weak and will eventually die. The same thing happens if they don't consume blood. The vampires of True Blood are not specifically weak to stakes, but any wooden object that pierces their heart. If a stake, wooden bullet, or anything else pierces their heart, they will explode into blood. Decapitation also kills vampires, and anything else. They must be invited into private homes. Once a vampire enters a home, the invitation can be taken back, which will cause the vampire to leave the house immediately. An easy way that vampires get around this is by just using their abilities to compel someone to invite them in. Garlic is not deadly, but irritating to vampires. This is likely due to the very pungent smell of garlic and their very acute senses. Vampires are especially susceptible to hepatitis D and V. Hepatitis D will cause a vampire to become weak for months, some say several months, but some say only a month. But Hep V will slowly weaken a vampire and eventually kill them. Vampires usually catch these afflictions by feeding on a human who has been infected, either by accident or sometimes on purpose. Vampires are not weak to regular magic. However, they are especially weak to a form of magic called necromancy. Because vampires are technically dead, necromancy can be used to kill and control them. This has caused vampires to hunt down witches that practice necromancy over the years and prosecute them. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about the government that rules over the vampires, known as the Authority. They oversee all vampires regardless of age and must be respected. The Magisters rule directly under the Authority and govern entire continents. Under the Magister is a vampire monarch, which consists of kings and queens that rule over their kingdoms. And beyond that, inside the kingdoms ruled by kings and queens are smaller areas that are controlled by sheriffs, such as Eric Northman, a considerably strong 1,000-year-old vampire. Eric's maker, Godric, who is a 2,000-year-old extremely powerful vampire, was also a sheriff. Sheriffs keep all the vampires in check and report back to higher authorities. And although vampires are trying to become part of human society and follow our laws, they still have their own laws. As a vampire, you are not allowed to do the following: murder another vampire, sell vampire blood, feed from another vampire's human, steal from other vampires. If you leave or enter an area, you must tell the sheriff, and all makers are responsible for the actions of the person they turn. We see a vampire being punished for something by getting his fangs removed. We learn in the show that they grow back after a few months, but it's probably embarrassing for a vampire to lose his fangs, as well as painful. When Bill killed another vampire, his original sentence was 5 years in a coffin encased with silver, but instead the Magister changes the punishment and forced Bill to become a maker to repay the vampire life that he took. So a Magister can change the laws and punishments when they see fit. In the last video, we took a look at the vampires of True Blood, and I gave a quick overview of all the supernatural species, so if you haven't seen that, you should definitely check it out. Since we did a deep dive on vampires, this time I'm going to be taking a look at the shapeshifters, werewolves, and werepanthers, which all belong to the family of weres. Before we get started, it's also important to know that vampires in the show have revealed themselves to humankind, but all species of weres remain secret and are considered myth or legend. They do have some unique abilities, but no species of were is immortal. The origin of weres is unknown. A powerful vampire named Russell Edgington, who is around 3,000 years old, stated that he has been collecting wolves for 2,000 years. So they have definitely existed for millennia, and possibly just as long as vampires. The wolves under Russell's control are branded and known as Operation Werewolf. Basically, Russell has used different groups of werewolves over the years like thugs to do his bidding in the daylight. The first species I'm going to look at is shapeshifters. The difference between a werewolf and a shapeshifter is that a werewolf can only take two forms, a human and a wolf. But a shifter, on the other hand, can take the form of any animal. In order to take the form of an animal, a shifter must study the animal very closely. This process is called imprinting. Once an animal has been imprinted, the shapeshifter can take the form of that animal and any others they have imprinted whenever they feel like. Although shifters can take the form of any animal, each shifter usually has a preferred animal, possibly because they find it easier to shift into that animal, or they just like it. Shifters usually call this their go-to shift, and these are some from the show. Sam Merlot turns into a collie. Daphne is seen taking the form of a deer, but says her go-to shift is a pig. Emery turns into a horse. Tommy Mickens turns into a pit bull, and his dad used to make Tommy shift to compete in dogfights, which is where he got all the scars on his body. When a shifter falls asleep, they will usually revert back to their human form, like when Sam fell asleep on Sookie's bed. Sometimes certain characteristics of their go-to shifts come through in their personality. Tommy is very aggressive and protective of his family, just like a pit bull, and Sam turns into a dog also, and apparently sometimes he barks in his sleep. Shifters often take the form of a bird to easily escape a bad situation, but Sam says that flying is difficult, so it probably takes a lot of practice. Once Sam even took the form of a fly to make it look like he completely disappeared when he was being chased by a group of people, so I guess insects are also on the list of things a shifter can turn into. Luna and Sam described how it feels when they shift, saying it's like a pressure all over your body, and it felt weird at first, but she actually enjoys it now. Shifters are not immortal like vampires. They age the same as humans and have no extra strength or speed. They also have no special healing abilities. The only physiological difference between humans and shifters is that shifters have a much higher body temperature. Their only supernatural abilities are shifting their form and enhanced senses. Tommy and Sam were both able to smell a werewolf as soon as he stepped in the bar, and Sam stated that he could smell fear. He was also able to smell that a group of guys were drunk from a distance, and he could smell that they had bad diets. This could also be because their go-to shifts are dogs, which have a better sense of smell. But I think all shifters have a better sense of smell. Shapeshifters forcibly shift on a full moon, similar to werewolves. They usually take the form of their go-to shift when this happens. Shapeshifters are known to be the more humane and intelligent of were species, since they are less prone to animalistic tendencies and anger, unlike werewolves and panthers, which can act a lot more like an animal even when in human form, sometimes losing control of themselves and shifting into wolf form or attacking someone. Even though werewolves and panthers are not called shifters, when they change form, it's still called shifting. How does one become a shifter? Well, the short answer is you can't. It's not possible to become a shifter, werewolf, or a werepanther. You must be born one. You cannot become infected by being bitten. If two shifters mate, then their child will be a shifter. But if a shifter mates with a human, there's a chance that the child could be human or shifter. Shifters can mate with humans and other were species, and possibly fairies since they're basically human as far as anatomy. If a shifter mates with a werewolf, then the child could end up werewolf or shifter. Luna was a shifter, and her boyfriend Marcus was a werewolf, and their daughter ended up being a werewolf. Shapeshifters and weres do not have the ability to shift form from birth. The ability manifests itself during puberty and is usually brought on by a full moon. If a shifter or were has a child with a human, because it can take a while for the abilities to manifest, it can be a mystery if your child has inherited the abilities or not. Sam was adopted and lived a normal life for many years, until one day he shifted and his adopted family abandoned him, probably afraid and unaware of what he was. According to the books, a shifter can become a vampire, but once they are turned, they will lose their ability to shift, so you can only be one or the other. Most vampires dislike werewolves, but they dislike shifters a little less because they usually keep to themselves and cause less problems. It can be assumed that werewolves and panthers are a subspecies of shifter, since shifters can take any form they want, including wolves and panthers, and are affected by the moon in the same way. At some point, a genetic change must have occurred in a shifter that only allowed them to take the form of a single animal. The magical species called Maenads have the ability to affect people's behavior and make them act as if they are in a trance. However, this ability does not work on other supernaturals, including weres, but they do have the ability to force weres to shift into animal form. It's not clear how long they are stuck after a Maenad does this. A Maenad came to Sam's bar and forced him to shift into his dog form. Now we can talk about a special kind of shifter, a skinwalker. A skinwalker has the exact same abilities as a shifter, except one difference. Not only can they take the form of animals, but other humans as well. Apparently, they can also convincingly copy vampires. A skinwalker named Luna says according to the Navajo tribe, skinwalkers are evil witches whose power allows them to take the form of any animal on Earth, including other people. A skinwalker can remain in animal form as long as they want, just like a regular shifter. However, if they remain shifted as another human for too long, they will experience high fever, vomiting blood, and will eventually lose consciousness. If they skinwalk for an extended period of time, it will cause death. Tommy remained shifted as Sam for almost a whole day, and he almost died. Later, Tommy got beat up by some werewolves and he was dying, and he said there's something wrong with him and that skinwalking did something to him. It's not clear what he meant by this, but maybe it caused some sort of internal bleeding, which would explain why he started vomiting blood. When someone first becomes a skinwalker, or they're under a lot of stress like Luna when she was in the hospital, they can accidentally shift into another person. Usually someone they are close with, because like imprinting an animal, you have to know the thing you're trying to turn into very well. Tommy and Luna both accidentally shifted into Sam and didn't know how to shift back right away. Both of them remained as Sam for quite a while, until they randomly shifted back into themselves. To become a skinwalker, you must be a shifter and then kill another shifter from your own family. Tommy became a skinwalker after killing his parents that attacked him, but Luna became one by accident when her mother died while giving birth to her. Now we can talk about werewolves. Werewolves are sometimes referred to as wares or wolves, and the children are called pups. To become a werewolf, you must be born one, and the first transformation usually occurs sometime during puberty at the full moon, just like a shifter. The book is a little different than the show as far as how wolves and shifters are born. In the show, as long as one parent is aware, then there's a chance that the child will be aware as well. But in the book, both parents have to be aware, either shifter, wolf, or panther. And even then, only the firstborn will have the abilities of aware. Any children born after that would just be ordinary humans. In this series, werewolves are not weak to silver. Only vampires possess a weakness to silver. Werewolves appear identical to humans, other than sometimes when they're angry, their eyes will glow. They also have a much higher body temperature than humans, just like shifters. But unlike shifters, werewolves do have some extra abilities, such as increased strength, able to easily overpower humans. Alcide was able to kill another werewolf by hitting him in the throat once. Werewolves are the strongest of wares. Some werewolves consume vampire blood, and when they do, their strength can rival that of a vampire, even one as strong as Eric Northman, who is over 1,000 years old. Eric stated himself that werewolves are weak, but once they get some of our blood, their strength can be a challenge. But according to werewolves, their greatest strength is in the pack. Werewolves also have heightened senses. They can smell from a great distance, and once a werewolf has your scent, it's almost impossible to escape. A good analogy would be you can run, but you can't hide. Werewolves also have some kind of night vision because they're able to run and hunt at night with no problem. And because their eyes glow in human form, it's possible that their better vision carries over. Werewolves have increased agility while in human form as well. It seems that females are more agile than males, as seen when one jumped a great distance while practice fighting with another werewolf. It's usually after their eyes glow that a werewolf performs some kind of supernatural feat. Werewolves have much greater endurance than humans, able to run and track great distances without becoming tired. They can sustain much more damage than a human too, getting into fights with humans and supernaturals and walking away with only minor injuries. In the show, they have no extraordinary healing abilities, at least not fast enough to visually notice like vampires. But in the books, werewolves do have better healing abilities. A gunshot would still kill them, but they can heal small cuts, wounds, and bruises quite fast. Of course, werewolves' most important ability is shifting into a wolf. They can shift into wolf anytime they want, except on a full moon. On a full moon, they'll forcibly shift into their wolf form until the moon phase passes. While in wolf form, they have amazing speed and agility, as well as sharp claws and fangs. In the books, werewolves also display a kind of resistance to being glamored by vampires. They can still be glamored, but it will only last around 24 hours, compared to a human where it will last forever. Werewolves can act much more animalistic than shifters while in human form. If a werewolf becomes angry, their eyes will glow and sometimes they lose control of themselves and attack or shift into wolf form. They're also extremely protective over their pack and family. Werewolves can eat regular food like a human, and while in wolf form, they can consume raw meat. Some werepanthers are seen consuming raw meat in human form, so werewolves can probably do this as well. All weres are very secretive and try to protect their identity at all costs, even willing to kill. Werewolves are especially secret, and it is forbidden for a wolf to speak to any non-werewolf about werewolf rules or the inner workings of the pack. A group of werewolves was willing to kill a group of friendly human activists because they risked their exposure. Werewolves are extremely protective and territorial. Every town and area usually has their own pack, and when a werewolf moves somewhere new, they are expected to register with the new pack. If you don't register, they will find you and ask you why you haven't registered and urge you to do so. It's very easy for a wolf to sniff out another wolf, so you wouldn't be able to hide for long. Packs meet on a regular basis and get together on full moons to run together. This is where they shift and run through the woods until the full moon passes. Shifters also often go for runs together, as seen when Sam hangs out with a group of shifters and they meet up on full moons to run. Wolf packs are very important to young wolves to teach them how to control their anger and animal instincts. Each pack is led by a pack master. They can be chosen by the pack, or someone can challenge a pack master, and if they win, they will become the new pack master. When a pack master is challenged in the show, the challenger and the pack master must track and kill an animal they release, and whoever succeeds first wins. Every pack could have their own traditions when it comes to challenging a pack master, but it shows that it's probably not always a fight to the death. When a new member joins a pack, they do a ritual where the pack master rubs some blood from a wild animal on their forehead. We see two different packs perform the same ritual, so it's probably pretty common. A packmaster named Marcus Bozeman is killed, and his mother says in order to honor him, they need his body. And after they bring the packmaster's body, the pack proceeds one by one to turn into wolf form and take a bite of him. It reminds me of the ritual from The Witcher, where they allow the wolves to eat the body. This does actually happen sometimes with real wolves. If one dies from outside causes, the pack will eat the body. This ritual was probably unique to this pack though, because Alcide came from another pack and he seems to be shocked by it. If a wolf breaks too many rules or isn't fitting in with the pack, they can be banished. Wolves call this abjuring. Alcide is not part of a pack at the time, but he abjures his girlfriend. But this could be because he was a lone wolf at the time, so basically he's his own pack master. Lone wolves are werewolves that are not part of a pack, either due to being abjured by their old pack or leaving of their own free will. This is pretty rare, and you must be an exceptionally strong wolf to survive on your own. They are considered outcasts by other wolves and are sometimes referred to as omega wolves. Most werewolves have a dislike of vampires, more so than other weres, and vampires share the sentiment. Vampires cannot feed on all supernatural creatures, but they can feed on weres. But werewolf blood provides no benefits over regular human blood. Now we can talk about the last species, werepanthers. According to werepanther mythology, panthers once ruled the animal kingdom and were worshipped as gods by humans, until the sky people turned all humans against nature. Except two of the humans did not want to turn against nature, so instead they went to the leader of the panthers under a full moon and told him they didn't want to live as humans anymore, and asked if they could become panthers. These two humans were called Ghost Mama and Ghost Daddy. Yeah, weird names. The leader of the panthers ate the two humans, and while in the stomach of the panther, they absorbed some of its magic. The panthers then regurgitated the two humans, and the next night, they became the first werepanthers. The only werepanthers seen in the television show are part of the Norris family. They live in a kind of compound away from town so they can be left alone. Werepanthers have become endangered, so the Norrises have resorted to inbreeding to try and keep their species alive, but it hasn't exactly worked. Because they have inbred so much, one girl says that most of the babies that get born now are stillborn or die soon after. And the rest of the family also suffers from birth defects causing mental and physical problems. It's unknown if there are still pure werepanthers out there somewhere, but I'm sure there must be other packs. Werepanthers have similar abilities to shifters and werewolves, such as enhanced senses like vision and smell, and they can shift at will between panther and human. However, werepanthers are weaker than werewolves and are considered the weakest of weres. They can eat normal food and age the same as humans. In the TV show, you have to be born a werepanther. The Norrises try to turn Jason Stackhouse by repeatedly biting him, but they learn that it doesn't work that way. But in the book, it's a little bit different. In the novel, The Southern Vampire Mysteries, Jason Stackhouse is in fact turned into a werepanther by being bitten, but because he was not born a panther, he could only do a half transformation, described in the books as half man, half panther, so he probably looked like a cheetah man, but a panther. In the book, Jason Stackhouse actually really enjoys being supernatural and wishes that he was a full werepanther. So because in the books Jason could become a half werepanther, it's also possible that someone could become a half werewolf, but there's no way of knowing for sure. Well, that's my video on the shifters, werewolves, and panthers of True Blood. I have to say it's different seeing werewolves be weaker than vampires. I grew up watching Underworld and other shows and movies where werewolves were always more uncontrollable but stronger. I enjoy seeing different takes on them, like turning into actual wolves instead of a half man, half wolf beast. I know everyone does not feel the same way though. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This is the third and final video about the different species of True Blood. In this video we're going to be looking at the Faeries, Maenads, and witches, including the Brujo. We're not going to be going over the plot, but looking at their origins, abilities, weaknesses, and more. I always forget to say this, but just a warning, there is some spoilers for the show, but I do try to keep them to a minimum if I can. If you like True Blood and vampire lore, be sure to check out my other two videos about the vampires and the werewolves of True Blood. Also, don't forget to leave any suggestions for a show or movie you'd like me to cover. The first species I want to look at is Faeries. Faeries, sometimes referred to as Fae, are one of the most powerful species of supernaturals. They used to live on Earth, but it was too dangerous. Now they live on the alternate dimension of Faerie, but they do still interact with humans sometimes. To get to the dimension of Faerie, you can use a portal created by a Fae, or if you're a Faerie yourself, they seem to be able to slip in and out of the dimension at will if they are powerful enough. Less powerful Fae, such as half-fairies, require a portal, usually created by another Faerie. When Sookie was asleep, she was able to enter some kind of dreamscape where other fairies could also enter through a magical pool that must have been some kind of portal. The vampire Bill Compton consumed a large amount of Sookie's half-fairy blood, and he was also able to enter the dreamscape-like area after. Bill sees a fairy while there, and she is shocked and confused how he got there. So fairy blood itself is like a key that allows you to enter this dimension. You can tell by the fairy's shock that no other beings should be allowed in here, and even she didn't know exactly how he managed to get in. In the show, there seem to be two different factions of fairies. One of the groups wants to live in peace and have minimal communication with humans, but still some communication. The other group wants to seal off the dimensional plane of fairy from Earth so that they will be with their own people forever. Each fairy has fairy godparents that act as guides to help them. A fairy godparent can also sense when their child is in danger and can teleport to them whenever they need them. Sookie travels to the fairy dimension led by her fairy godmother Claudine. While there, Sookie is surprised to see her grandfather she thought was dead. He says that he's only been there for a few hours, but Sookie informs him that he's been gone for almost 20 years. Sookie only spends around 15 to 20 minutes in the dimension, and when she returned, a whole year had passed. Time in the fairy dimension must pass a lot slower in relation to time on Earth. When Sookie first arrives, everyone is eating a special fruit the fairies call a lumiere fruit. She soon finds out that if you eat one of these fruit, you can no longer leave the fairy dimension without dying, so it's a way to trap people there. Sookie and her grandfather leave the dimension through a portal that looks like a black hole. Once they get back to Earth, Sookie is okay because she didn't eat a lumiere fruit, but her grandfather had, and he dies not long after arriving back on Earth. The Fae must be using this fruit to trap unknowing fairies in their dimension. They could be doing this because they fear they will go extinct due to vampires. The blood of fairies is extremely alluring for vampires. Any vampire that has tasted it says it's the best they have ever had. To them it tastes amazing, smells amazing, and can allow them to walk in the sun for a short period of time. It is said that royal fairy blood is even better. For these reasons, vampires almost hunted the Fae to extinction, which is why they live primarily on their own dimension now, to be safe. Until certain events that happen in the show, all vampires did in fact think that fairies were extinct. Fairies have the ability to change their appearance depending on what the dominant species is where they are. When around humans, they appear almost identical, but their true form more closely resembles a goblin or an evil-looking elf. Their skin is a gray color and they have sharp teeth as well as bright blue eyes and pointed ears. When Claudine is killed, she appeared human, but you can see after she dies she looks more like her true appearance. Fairies don't shapeshift like werewolves or other shapeshifters do. They change their form by creating an illusion through their magic. After a fairy is killed, their body will shrivel and then turn to dust. Fairies have their own language and writings. Sookie finds a page with strange writing on it, and it turns out to be an old fairy language. And after a fairy recognizes it, she was able to use a special kind of magic to reveal the true message. The fairy says that this kind of writing and magic is a lost art, so it must be quite old considering how long fairies live. Fairies are not immortal, but they do age much slower than humans. A pretty young looking fae says that he's only 130, and another says that 500 is halfway to being an elder. Fairies that are part of the royal family can live even longer. A royal fairy named Niall is over 5,500 years old. The average fairy probably lives around 1 to 3,000 years old. Half fairies like Sookie age the exact same as humans. Half fairies, or halflings, have most of the same abilities as full fairies, but the most important difference is that a full fae has unlimited magic, but a half fairy has a finite amount of magic and can lose it altogether if it's used too often. Another fairy describes this as losing your light. So it's important for half fairies to only use their powers when they absolutely need to. If a half fae loses their power, they would just be an ordinary human. Not all halflings inherit the fae's magical abilities. Sookie and Jason are brother and sister, but Sookie has magical fae abilities like light powers and telepathy, and Jason has none. Well, he does still have one fae ability, and that is attraction and seduction. Fairies are extremely attractive to other humans and other supernaturals. They have some kind of magical allure. They are known for their promiscuous nature and laying with humans, sometimes even against their will. This is why Jason is known as such a ladies' man, and his friends joke that he has slept with every girl in town. It's because he's part fae, so women and even some male vampires find him extremely attractive. This could also be why sometimes while talking to girls, they seem to become entranced by him. I honestly never put this together while watching the show, but it seems extremely obvious now. These are the magical abilities of fairies. Fairies have a multitude of strong abilities, and like a vampire, they grow stronger with age. Telepathy may be the ability they use most. They can hear the thoughts of anyone around them, including other supernaturals, except vampires. Because vampires are dead, they have no brainwaves or electrical impulses, so their minds can't be read. Which kind of implies somehow fairies can read brainwaves. Weird. Sometimes Sookie becomes overwhelmed by voices and has to concentrate to block them out. As well as hearing people's thoughts, they can also enter people's dreams. This is how Sookie's fairy godmother first came to her. Fairies can perform general magic that any human witch could perform, but it's stronger when a fairy does it because magic flows through them easier. They have also been seen reversing spells that have been cast on people. A witch cast a spell on someone, but Sookie was able to easily break the spell with no incantation like a human witch uses. Fairies also have the power of light and electricity. They're able to produce beams of light from their hands and can send people flying and render them unconscious. This power is especially useful on vampires. Some fairies are seen being able to produce a kind of lightning. Their light abilities are described as being nature itself, and depending on the time of day, the light will be a different color, usually more blue at night. Another offensive ability involving light is their ability to throw these kind of light bombs that explode like grenades. The next ability is psychometry. Basically, it's the ability to touch an object or place and then know the history. Fairies are able to access the past by tapping into the energy of the universe. With an object, they can even read the minds of anyone who was present at the time. Sookie wanted to know how her parents died, and they were able to go to the place and see what actually happened, like a flashback. Full-blooded fairies can teleport anywhere at will, including other dimensions, and not just the fairy dimension. Sookie's fairy godmother was able to appear at will whenever she wanted, as well as being able to teleport Sookie to another dimension with her. Full fairies can teleport other fairies or humans to other dimensions, and can even banish them there. But halflings are not capable of teleportation. It's also not clear how many of these dimensions exist. Fairies are capable of making a magical vow or promise. After making the vow or promise, the fairies, or fairy and human, touch fingers and their fingers will glow. If the promise is broken, it's seen as a great dishonor to that group of fairies and can even be seen as an act of war. Fairies can also make special contracts signed in their blood, and it is considered the most sacred of contracts. It's called blood on vellum. Like I said before, fairies have the ability to change their appearance by creating an illusion with magic. We know their real appearance looks more like a goblin, but they seem to remain looking like humans most of the time. This ability to create illusions is probably the same ability they use to make the fairy realm look more appealing to Sookie and the other half fairies. Fairies are also able to create their own small alternate dimensions. We see this with the special fairy nightclub called Hot Wings. It is an invite-only nightclub that some humans are invited to, such as the mayor of Bonton. But these humans don't know that they are fairies, and they are always brought to the club with blindfolds on so they don't know where it's located. The club also serves as a safe house for fairies and halflings trying to escape vampires. The club is located in the middle of a field in Louisiana. The club is completely invisible to humans and other supernaturals. It can only be seen by fairies or those with fairy blood. Only a very strong fairy can create these miniature alternate dimensions. In fact, it probably takes multiple fairies to do this. There is another special fairy ability that's called Supernova. This special ability is unique to the Stackhouse bloodline. It allows them to channel their light into a giant ball like a supernova, and when it explodes, it will kill any nearby vampire. So it's kind of like a spirit bomb from Dragon Ball Z. Fairies don't have any specific weaknesses. They age much slower and might have slightly increased resilience, but they can be killed the same way that any human could. Now I want to talk about some of the things that happen to a vampire when they consume fairy blood. Fairy blood smells extremely attractive to all supernaturals, especially vampires. Jessica described the blood of a fairy smelling like cotton candy and other sweets. Because their blood has magical properties meant to attract people, it's possible that their blood could smell different to everyone. When a vampire consumes the blood of a fairy, they're able to walk in the sun for a short time. The purity of the fairy blood determines its effectiveness. A half-fairy allowed a vampire to walk in the sun for only a few minutes, but it did stop the vampire from being completely burned up. A full fairy's blood allowed a vampire to walk in the sun for a few hours. And finally, the blood of a fairy-vampire hybrid will allow another vampire to walk in the sun forever. However, if that fairy dies, the vampire will not be able to walk in the sun anymore. A vampire that consumes enough fae blood, or the blood of a powerful fae, will be immune to fairy magic for a while. After a vampire consumed the blood of a fairy elder, he was not affected by their light powers anymore. He described their powers as feeling like a tingling sensation. Remember those pocket dimensions that fairies can create? Well, after a vampire consumed fairy blood, he was able to perceive the dimension just like a fairy would be able to. Fairy blood can even temporarily keep a vampire alive after being staked. But vampires must be careful because if they consume too much fairy blood, it will cause them to become intoxicated and act like they are drunk. Here are some other interesting facts about fairies. Full fairies and halflings do not have a blood type. Sookie is a half fairy, and when she's injured, they brought her to the hospital, but the doctors said they could not establish a blood type. It's possible fairies have their own special blood type. Their blood is said to contain mercury, neon, titanium, and francium. It is implied by a fairy that the gestation period of a fae baby is only a few weeks. We see a fairy that is almost due, but she's only been pregnant for 2 to 3 weeks. As long as the mother is fae, the baby will mature very fast. A half-fae will also mature faster than a human, but only if the mother is fae. If the mother is human, like in Sookie's case, the human will develop as normal. One other interesting fact about fae babies is that full fae or half-fae born from a fairy mother won't have an umbilical cord. And fairy mothers experience pleasure instead of pain while giving birth, which could explain why this fae has 17 sisters. Fairy mothers consume salt while they are pregnant because they say it causes their light to break and it will begin the birthing process. Fairies can be turned into vampires, but as far as anyone knows, this has only been done once. Warlow is the only known fairy vampire, and he was turned by Lilith herself, the first ever vampire, rumored to be created by God. Fairy vampire hybrids are possibly the strongest of any supernatural species. The combination gives them almost all the positives of both races with little drawbacks. Fairy vampire hybrids are not technically dead like other vampires, which means their body is warm to the touch and they can still eat normal food if they want. They can walk in the sun and are immune to silver. Fairies live for an extraordinary long time, but fae vampires are truly immortal just like regular vampires. A royal fairy named Niall is over 5,500 years old and appears to be an old man, but Warlow is the same age and appears much younger. Fairy vampire hybrids have all the increased strength and speed of a vampire, but can also use all the magical abilities of a fairy. Well, that's it for the fairies. Now we can talk about the witches, including the Brujo. Witches are men or women that practice magic. Yes, men are also witches in this show. The word warlock or wizard is never used. Anyone can practice magic, but it seems that some have a greater natural ability to channel magic than others. There are many different types of magic in True Blood: astrology, divination, spell casting, and spirit communication, like being a spirit medium. Some forms of magic, like the Brujo magic, is passed down through a bloodline. We'll talk more about the Brujo soon though. Depending on the witch, they may practice their abilities through a belief system: shamanism, voodoo, Wiccan, and many more. Most witches use their abilities for healing and protection spells, but there are those who use magic for evil. Depending on how much skill a witch has, they can complete much more difficult spells. Witches can also join together to cast much more powerful spells. According to a vampire named Bill Compton, there has been witches that have become so highly skilled and powerful that they could defeat even the oldest of vampires. The limitations of a witch's power is unknown. It's also unknown if one witch could be stronger than another, or if given enough time and practice, any witch could become as powerful as the next. Regardless, witches are some of the most powerful creatures in existence. The origin of witches is unknown, but they have existed for thousands of years, each generation passing their knowledge on to the next. Some witches channel their power from demons or dark places, but other witches, including Wiccans, channel their magic from nature. According to a witch named Marnie, witchcraft is older than vampires, and they have tried to suppress powerful magic, possibly because vampires cannot perform magic. There has never been a vampire able to produce magic, so maybe only living creatures can perform it. Vampires are especially afraid of a form of magic called necromancy. Necromancy is a form of magic that involves raising the dead as well as controlling them. And because vampires are technically dead, they are susceptible to this form of magic. The Spanish Inquisition was mostly led by vampires under false pretenses. They condemned people for witchcraft, but in reality they just needed people to feed on. Unfortunately for the vampires, one of the women they had procured to feed on was a practitioner of necromancy. But while on the stake, she used her magic, with some others joining in, and forced all vampires within 20 miles to walk into the sun, killing them. This is known as one of the worst events to happen to vampires, and it's why vampires fear necromancy so much. The witch who casted the spell, named Antonia, said that she was a healer and she only turned to the dark art of necromancy to save the people in her village from dying and sickness. These are some of the spells and abilities that witches perform. Through spellcasting, they can perform telekinesis, lifting objects with an unseen force. Elemental magic, able to control air, earth, fire, and water. Mind control, able to manipulate and control other humans and vampires when they use necromancy. The power to take away memories and even place false ones. They can astral project, able to separate from their physical body and appear in another location. They also have the ability to call on spirits and have them appear. This is called spirit summoning. They have a lot of wards and protection spells. This is the ability to create force fields that cannot be entered. They can place protection spells on locations or specific people. Necromancy can be used to bring back animals and humans from the dead. It can also be used to kill and completely control vampires. Some people that practice magic can channel magic from deities, like how Maenads channel their magic from Dionysus, the son of Zeus and the god of ritual madness and ecstasy. Witches have the ability to brew potions. These are elixirs with supernatural properties made from herbs and other ingredients. Witches or mediums, such as Lafayette, have the ability of divination. He is seen reading tarot cards and everything that he says is true. He can also be possessed by a spirit. That spirit will take over his body until he makes it leave or it leaves on its own. Sometimes he allows it to happen so a spirit can pass on a message, but another time a vengeful spirit took over his body to exact revenge. So it's not always a good thing. Another form of divination witches can perform is reading runes, which are stones with magical markings. They can also perform a magic known as scrying. The most common form of this would be looking into a crystal ball. It's being able to see future events through reflective surfaces. Depending on the kind of surface used, you can see different things. Water is best for visions of everyday events. Metal or glass reveals things surrounding wealth and money. And finally, blood can be used to see things about life and death, such as when Marnie used a pool of blood and could see herself being shot. Witches often use magical objects to enhance their power. Amulets are used to protect someone from different kinds of harm. possibly magic or physical. Sometimes they use a double-edged ceremonial dagger known as an athame. This dagger usually has a black handle and is used to direct energy. It's often used in ceremonial magic by Wiccans, and these exist for real. Candles are also often used by witches to help amplify their spells. And of course, witches keep grimoires. These are books containing spells, rituals, incantations, magical recipes, and more. Witches don't have any specific weaknesses, but they are just humans, so they can be killed quite easily. They are susceptible to other magic, and fairy magic seems to be stronger than the magic of a witch. Suki barely knew what she was doing, but she was able to break a spell cast on Eric by a fairly powerful witch. Now we can take a look at the Brujo.
It's a Latin thing.
A special kind of witch seen in the show is a Brujo. They are Spanish witches that receive their power from demons. As Jesus says, it's a dark magic. Jesus is a Brujo, and so is his father. His father says that this gift runs in their blood. Jesus uses his special Brujo magic to break a spell that was cast by Marnie. To summon the Brujo, he had to cut his arm and draw blood as a kind of offering. Jesus tells Lafayette not to take offense to anything that he says while he's transformed. He implies that once the transformation happens, it can be difficult to control himself. Marnie dies and comes back as a spirit, and possesses Lafayette's body. Marnie is jealous of how strong the Brujo is and attempts to steal his magic, and succeeds. Jesus says you can't trade magic like Pokemon cards, but after Marnie threatens Lafayette's life, he changes his mind. Marnie stabs him with a ritual dagger, and Jesus seems to do something as well, and then a moment later, Marnie, who is in Lafayette's body, becomes a Brujo. So it is in fact possible to pass the gift of being a Brujo to someone else. But I don't think you would be able to do this with all forms of magic. Now we can talk about the final species, the Maenads. Maenads are a very rare supernatural species. Only one is seen in the entire show, and her name is Marianne. Maenads are the immortal female followers of Dionysus, the son of Zeus and the god of ritual madness and ecstasy. Not much is known about the origins of Maenads. A shapeshifter named Daphne was friends with Marianne and claimed that she has been alive as long as there has been an earth to walk on. She has been known as Gaia, a Greek goddess of earth, and the Egyptian goddess Isis. She seems to travel place to place, living as a nomad, finding new people to entrance with her magic. Maenads are apparently attracted by energy. A character named Tara has a kind of ritual performed on her by a fake witch. But because Tara thought the magic was real, it actually gave the spell enough power for Marianne to detect it. During the ritual, Tara sees a younger version of herself, but with black eyes. This is actually Marianne appearing to Tara through some kind of telepathy. Maenads are inspired by their god Dionysus to enter a state of madness and frenzy through dancing and intoxication. They lose all control, shouting and taking their clothes off. Sometimes they perform a ritual where they hunt down animals and sometimes humans and eat their raw flesh. A vampire states that Maenads' power and immortality comes from their belief in Dionysus. Because they believe they are immortal, they are. If somehow you were able to shake their faith and make them stop believing in Dionysus, they would be mortal again. Maenads appear identical to humans most of the time. The only physical difference is that they can transform their hands into a 3-taloned claw. Maenads are sometimes seen with snakes and often dress in animal skins and wear ivy wreaths with flowers around their head. They usually dress like this during rituals. They are known as a type of nymph, a goddess of nature. These are the supernatural abilities that a Maenad has. They do not age and cannot die as long as their magical defenses are up. Like I said earlier, according to a vampire queen, Sophie Anne, Maenads are immortal because they believe they are. Their beliefs alone gives their magic enough strength to make them virtually immortal. Marianne was only killed because Sam turned into a bull, which is the symbol of Dionysus, and he tricked her into thinking she had to sacrifice herself. Therefore, she let her magical defenses down and allowed herself to be killed. Marianne often has raving parties in the woods and sacrifices different animals and sometimes people to Dionysus. Maenads have great durability and healing abilities. Suki used her Fey magic on Marianne, and it had little to no effect. When even a vampire as strong as Russell Edgington, who is almost 3,000 years old, is sent flying across the room. Marianne was also able to deflect a bullet with her bare hand. A vampire bites Marianne and she laughs while it's happening and is fully healed only a moment later. Vampires cannot feed on Maenads because their blood is a black, poisonous liquid. When a vampire drinks their black blood, it causes them to gag and choke on it. Maenads also have increased strength. Marianne was able to easily pick Sookie up off the ground with one arm. It's not exactly clear if Maenads are physically weaker or stronger than vampires though. They can, however, move with super speed. Marianne was able to move so fast that even a vampire could not follow her with his eyes. Vampires can move extremely fast and have extremely fast reflexes to perceive other vampires, so the fact that a Maenad moved faster than he could see means that Maenads could be even faster than vampires or equivalent to a very strong vampire. Maenads have the ability to channel magic. Maenads can channel magic from humans and other supernaturals. When she uses this ability, she seems to start phasing or vibrating, causing her to look like she's glitching. She usually stands still and closes her eyes while doing this, so it requires some concentration, possibly similar to meditation. Maenads can channel others' magic, and they are also attracted by powerful energy, like how the ritual Tara went through attracted Marianne de Bontemps. Maenads are able to influence and control the thoughts and behaviors of humans. All humans around Marianne start to act crazy and euphoric when she affects them with her magic. Sometimes she does this by doing her meditative state, and other times she can do it by dancing and interacting with the humans. While under the effects of a Maenad, people are shown having solid black eyes. When people are in this state and have black eyes, they are under Marianne's control. She is able to control them and make them feel extreme pain if they disobey her in any way. After this trance-like state ends, people don't remember what they did while under the effects. Maenads cannot affect other supernaturals with this magic. Sookie, who is a halfling, and Sam, who is a shapeshifter, are not affected by magic Marianne uses to make everyone else act crazy. However, Maenads can channel shapeshifters and most likely other wares and force them to shift into their animal form. It's not clear how long a shifter is stuck in animal form after a Maenad forces them to shift. Also, when Marianne forces Sam to shift, he takes the form of his go-to shift, which is a dog. But I wonder if it would be possible for a Maenad to force a shapeshifter to turn into a bug and then step on it. Maybe. In the books, Maenads have limited control over vampires, but they are able to afflict them with something called the madness infection. This makes a vampire basically go insane and act like a beast, killing and attacking uncontrollably. There is no cure for the madness infection, and the vampire must be staked. Maenads have the ability to change their hands into powerful three-taloned claws. These claws can be used to cause a lot of damage. But not only that, they are also poisonous. According to the doctor in the show that helps Sookie after she is attacked, the poison of a Maenad works similar to the poison of a Komodo dragon, but more effective. Proper medical treatment must be used because not even vampire blood can heal someone wounded by a Maenad. Vampire blood has extremely powerful healing abilities, able to bring people back from the brink of death, but cannot save someone from Maenad poison. In fact, when Bill tries to give Sookie some of his blood to help, it causes her to have a seizure. Real Komodo dragons actually do not have poison, they have venom, but the effects are still probably similar to that of a Maenad. The effects are inhibition of blood clotting, lowering of blood pressure, muscle paralysis, and hypothermia. Maenads might also have the ability of aerokinesis. While mind controlling a group of people, unexpected gusts of wind are seen all around. It's possible due to their connection with nature that they could also have some control over elements just like regular witches do, but it's also possible that this was just a random byproduct of using her magic. Maenads don't really have any weaknesses, but I guess you could say that their biggest weakness is also their biggest strength, their belief. As long as they believe in Dionysus and that they are immortal, they will be. But if their faith wavers at all, or they're tricked, they can be killed. Thanks so much for watching my ultimate True Blood lore video. If you've made it this far, that's impressive, and I really appreciate it. I'm working on a few highly requested videos, and I just finished one I think you guys are really gonna like. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't, maybe subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.